How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Boylai Hobby Time. I had a prompt to work with this week, and that prompt was dangers of the outdoors. Obviously, I could have gone with something commonly dangerous like quicksand or the Bermuda Triangle, but I decided to find inspiration somewhere else, and that was in a bits box. I have a few of these little boxes. Well, these aren't really boxes, they're more like bins. It doesn't really matter though, a bits box, bin, bag. They're loose catch-alls for bits of a similar nature. And if you watch much crafting YouTube, you'll know that most people have a little bag of secrets.
Show me your bag of secrets. I thought you said he was good at making bombs and robots and stuff.
What I meant to say was, he likes collecting things.
In the past, I've had good success prospecting for inspiration with these California gold miners from Pegasus. I've asked how can we tell that they're specifically California gold miners as opposed to gold miners from anywhere else where gold was mined in the West? And no one's been able to give me a suitable answer. So if you have a funny and good answer, please leave that in the comments. Because there are only 4, I decided to take a little more care and time in painting each of these than my usual approach to 1 to 72nd scale figures. So each of them got their own painting handle. Okay, so here's the basic plan I had at this point. I wanted a swamp or a cluster of pools that is itself a monster that consumes people and animals. Like a mix between a pitcher plant and the dead marshes. Or I guess that actually just describes the dead marshes. After tracing out the general shape, layout, and spacing of the pools, I put my canvas board on a nice clean workspace, and then I threw on my gloves because we're going to dive right into the terrain paste. Rather than building up a foundation of foam for the terrain like I usually do, I decided to just go straight into the Sculpting mold and form the landscape out of it directly. After mixing a couple handfuls with some water, getting that thoroughly mixed, I smacked it down on the canvas board and I worked it around until the whole thing was covered. Then I hollowed out a large central pool with a cluster of smaller pools around it. And when it was done, it kind of looks like the craters of the moon. That Sculpting mold is going to take a decent amount of time to dry, so we'll set that aside for now and paint up our Californian gold miners, all of whom I had primed outside with a clear coat of matte enamel. I followed the matte varnish with a coat of rusty red acrylic primer sprayed on from the airbrush. And once they were all primed, it was time to break out the wet palette and get to work on the details. I loaded up the palette with the primaries as well as black and white and ice yellow, and I went to town. 3 of these guys got nice denim jeans, which I layered up and enjoyed doing so. This is a slower painting method than I would typically use with 1 to 72nd scale miniatures. Often that's because when I'm doing a larger diorama in 1 to 72nd scale, it has a dozen or so miniatures that need to be painted, and it's just not practical to do it slowly. Usually I do a zenithal highlight and some contrast paints, and then maybe dry brush on some highlights. But I really did enjoy slowing down a little bit and painting some jeans. The guy who's not wearing jeans is in a frontiersman outfit. This is the 3rd or 4th time I've painted him. He comes from a box from IMEX, that is the Lewis and Clark box, and it has a lot of really great miniatures for Wild Western content. So I believe this is either supposed to be C.S. Lewis or Clark Gable. I'm not sure which one. Speaking of miniature painting, I was inspired by painting these guys to take on another project this week, which I made into a short. Typically, I don't think my content suits itself to short form content, but for the project I had in mind, it seemed like a rare case where it might be the correct format. I'm not really sure what to think about it. If you go watch that, you should let me know what you think. After painting Jason Mraz, the last mini to paint was this little dude with suspenders. I honestly don't even know if the change in painting style makes that big of a difference in the end, especially from like a distance of more than 5 inches from the model. But it is all about the practice. And I can already hear the question in the comments, why would these guys be panning for gold in a swamp? And that's a great question, but we'll answer it a little later in the video. By this time it was the next day, and the sculpt mold was done, so I decided to trim down a bit of the sides, which I actually did off camera on my bandsaw, and I was left with 4 nice flat profiles. I broke out the airbrush again, and it was time to paint the landscape, and for a brief moment I thought I was going to change things up and make this a collection of geyser hot springs with all of the bacteria yellow-stony colors. However, I changed my mind and went with the original route of a swamp because this is going to be a bizarre looking diorama, and having it grounded in a more visually familiar setting like a swamp felt more palatable, but just as equally potable. You can't drink any of it. I was bouncing around between a few ideas, like a big spiky mouth, like a sarlacc pit, or like a big tub of acid, but I finally settled on an eye, a big green eye. Felt like that would be fun to look at. But then of course I'm faced with the issue of coming up with some lore to justify the giant green eye in the ground. Which is great because you know what they say, the lore the merrier. I've actually personally never heard anybody say that before, but there's no way that I'm the first person to have said that. In the wild imaginary West, we have different classes of monsters. The Bog is a Titan-class burrowing creature that lives in Montana, in a large coulee, the steep walls of which make escape very difficult for anything that wanders in. And speaking of wandering, my camera got a little bit of a mind of its own here. Don't worry, I'll notice in just a second. That's better. The bog makes little pools filled with poisonous and highly acidic water that it uses to digest its prey. To attract things to itself, the bog gives off an aroma that's pungent and offensive when first smelled, but contains a substance that quickly causes curiosity for the smeller and makes the aroma more interesting than repulsive. The prey, typically mammals, will then begin to unconsciously start to attribute the smell to something that it is searching for, like food, shelter, or even abstract concepts like companionship or power. Before long, the odor will compel the victim toward the bog, and to an observer, smelling gold in a swamp seems ridiculous, but to the victim, it will make perfect sense. Smell and pheromones are often used by Titan-class monsters to influence smaller creatures to do their will. The size and concentration has an almost mind-controlling effect. The end goal of the bog is to have its prey wander in and fall into one of the pools or into the eye itself, where it will be quickly broken down and robbed of all its nutrients. And if you're wondering why it needs such a big eye, well, it's because it really enjoys stargazing. After the resin had been poured, I popped all of the little bubbles with a butane torch, which was very satisfying. I did not degas it this time because this is a shallow pour resin and I knew I would be able to reach all the bubbles with the torch. I left that to cure overnight, and when I came back to it in the morning, it was nice and firm and ready for the next step. And that was to add a carpet of grass and moss. First by adding some static tack. Wait, what is this? Where was I? Yeah, that's right. Adding some static tack, followed by static grass and some flocking, which I splotched around, trying not to cover all of the mud, because I did want some of that to be visible in the end. Next, I threw on some Army Painter tufts of swamp grass to add a little bit of variation, and finally I added some pond scum, using just a thin applicator, which I dotted on some pond scum colored paint. And then finally, it was time to put all of our little Californians in place. The last thing to do was to paint the sides of the diorama with black 3.0. And after that, I called it good. Before moving on to my final shots, please take a moment to enjoy the art challenge submissions sent in by my patrons who also had to work with the theme, the dangers of the outdoors. big thank you to all the patrons who participated. If you're interested in watching more content from the Wild Imaginary West, I have a playlist for that linked below. Otherwise, that is it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Huge shout out, as always, to my patrons. You guys are the best. Have an awesome week, everyone. I'll see you next time.